Horror games have always fascinated me since I played the first Silent Hill in late 2000. Now, games have a unique immersion they can offer that movies can't really be compared to. If you can put the player in the shoes of the character, the fear of horror games can feel very real and very intense. Especially as graphics improve and game concepts expand, recently we've seen horror games showcased at the forefront of popularity, something that doesn't really happen with the horror genre. And it's technology that plays a huge part in this. Things like virtual reality, increased potential in games, and a maturing gaming industry have all played a part in making horror games better and scarier than ever before. Though this distinction can be easily lost on many, because some consider this most terrifying, whereas others consider this even more terrifying.
Oh my shit.
And on the surface, this seems to be a simple question of, are jump scares actually scary? But what does it actually take to make a terrifying horror game? Purported as one of the scariest games in years, Five Nights at Freddy's was a massive success, spawning a huge array of merchandise, fan content, sequels, and spin-offs. And its release date only predated another immensely popular horror game by 4 days, the demo to the cancelled Silent Hills game, PT. Now, both of these games were horror games, but they both relied heavily upon different aspects to make them scary. Five Nights at Freddy's relied heavily upon jump scares, keeping the lore and story to the background, surrounded in mystery and speculation. PT certainly did this also, but there were very few, if any, jump scares throughout the entire demo. Instead, it used atmosphere, implication, and confusion to create its fearful setting. So, how do these games contrast so sharply, yet achieve the same result? With Five Nights at Freddy's, it's easy to call it a game made from a gimmick, and give the developer no credit. It's simplistic, sure, and has little in the way of variance, and the assets hardly move, but greater care was taken than most might initially think. In fact, in Five Nights at Freddy's, the player is actually being tricked in many different game elements, whether they realize it or not. And the first one is an impending doom. Right from the first frame of the game, there's essentially what amounts to a countdown clock. It's always there, regardless of what the player is looking at, and it always ticks down. There's no way to reverse it or stop it. The player can only hope to slow it down. This creates immediate tension, and keeps that tension throughout the entire game. There's always this number looming over the player's head, increasing their stress and worry. It then forces the player to concentrate, especially in later nights when the difficulty increases. It forces the player to concentrate intensely.
But that's just the way it's gonna be. There's no way in hell I'm gonna be able to beat this if I don't focus on certain moments.
If the player wants to manage everything right, they have to give their full attention to the game, which can catch many players off guard. If they aren't expecting the jump scare, or their focus is elsewhere, it's much more likely to be an effective scare. It also limits the player to looking through one screen at a time, instead of many. This means the player has to take their eyes off their immediate surroundings, which makes for increased anticipation every time the player puts their handheld screen away. It's not just the jump scares that make the game scary. It's all of these elements working together that make the jump scares as effective as they are. And on the other side, we can look at PT, a game which has very little in the way of jump scares. Instead, PT creates an unsettling atmosphere. Right from the first door you pass through, you can tell something is very wrong. There's an eerie news story on the radio about a father murdering his family.
This brutal killing took place while the family was gathered at home on a Sunday afternoon.
The rain outside is just barely audible, and there's strange pictures all around. As the player passes through the only unlocked door, they will soon realize that the hallway they are in repeats, trapping them in what seems to be an endless loop. Every version of the hallway is different from the last. And this is another way to build tension. What is going to happen during the next iteration of the hallway? Every time the player opens that door, there's another chance of something else happening. PT continues to make the player uncomfortable right from the get-go, where the player actually has no clear idea where they are, why they're there, or what they're supposed to do. Doors seem to open and unlock or lock randomly. Small things start to change, almost unnotable at times, which keeps the player guessing. They're never sure if that's something that happened last time, changed this time, or was going to be the next scare. And the sound design was absolutely spectacular. Whether it was crying babies, crying women, strange noises from the radio, creepy voices, disgusting sounds, and the building of what seems to be a siren. All of these played into the player's mind. These voices may tell the player to turn around or to avoid certain things.
Look behind you. I said, look behind you.
It plays completely on the fear of the unknown. In a lot of ways, once you know what a monster is, it somehow becomes far less scary than when it was hidden in the shadows. And PT applies this effect to the whole game. The player will find no answers, no solution, just more and more unknowns. The game relies on the player to apply the fear from their own imagination into the game, which is why the game seems probably much more scarier than it actually is, because it's your own mind filling in what makes it scary. Which is why both games may seem scarier to different people. Some will say that jump scares aren't actually scary and scoff when people say they enjoy Five Nights at Freddy's. Others will call PT a boring walking simulator, with nothing really exciting happening throughout the entire game. I recommend trying them both, as each person has to figure out for themselves which game would make them more scared. After all, the only you is you, right?